Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything around you, your phone, your money, your government, your religion, even the idea of human rights, is something that was invented, not discovered, not given by nature, invented, made up by us, by humans. Your country? Invented. The borders on the map? Someone drew those lines, often with a pen dipped in the blood of conquest. The laws that govern your life? Written by other humans, revised by other humans, and enforced by systems that exist only because enough people agree to pretend they are real. The money in your pocket? A piece of paper with ink on it that works entirely because of collective belief. Take away the belief, and it is just paper. What if the secret to why we rule this planet is not our strength, not our speed, not even our intelligence, but our ability to believe in stories that do not exist? That is the jaw-dropping idea at the heart of one of the most remarkable books ever written. A book that will change how you see yourself, your society, and every single human being who has ever walked this earth. Today we are diving deep into Sapiens, a brief history of humankind, written by historian and professor Yuval Noah Harari. Welcome to the channel. If you love big ideas that make you see the world differently, you are in exactly the right place. We break down the world's most powerful books into deep, engaging summaries so you can absorb all the wisdom, all the stories, and all the life-changing ideas without having to read 400 pages. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. It genuinely means a lot. Now, let us begin. Sapiens is not just a history book. It is more like a mirror. Hold it up and you see the entire human journey, from a small, frightened ape man hiding from lions on an African savanna, all the way to the species that landed on the moon and is now dreaming about colonizing Mars. And the story in between? It is stranger, darker, funnier, and more surprising than almost anything you have ever heard. This book asks the questions that most history books are afraid to ask. Why did Homo sapiens win? Why not the Neanderthals, who were stronger and had bigger brains in some ways? How did a few thousand people in Spain conquer an entire continent of millions in South America? How does money work when it is basically just a shared illusion? Why did the agricultural revolution, which we usually celebrate as the birth of civilization, actually make life worse for most people for thousands of years? And what has all of this progress actually done to our happiness? These are not comfortable questions, but they are necessary ones. And Harari answers them in a way that is brilliant, honest, and at times genuinely unsettling. So who is Yuval Noah Harari, and why should you listen to him? Harari was born in Israel in 1976. He grew up in a secular Jewish family, and from a young age was drawn to the big questions, not just what happened in history, but why it happened the way it did, and what it means for us today. He studied history at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and later completed his doctorate at Oxford University, where he specialized in medieval military history. He later returned to Israel, and is now a professor at the Hebrew University, where he teaches world history. He is also, quite remarkably, a practitioner of Vipassana meditation, a form of Buddhist mindfulness practice that involves sitting in silence for hours, sometimes days at a time, with no phone, no conversation, no distractions. Harari credits this practice with giving him the mental clarity to zoom out from the details of history and see the really large patterns. He says that without meditation, he could not have written Sapiens. Sapiens was first published in Hebrew in 2011 as a textbook companion for his university courses. It was then translated into English and published globally in 2014. What happened next was extraordinary. The book became a worldwide phenomenon that almost no one predicted. It has sold over 25 million copies. It has been translated into more than 60 languages. Barack Obama put it on his recommended reading list. Bill Gates praised it enthusiastically. Mark Zuckerberg picked it for his online book club. It has been discussed by economists, biologists, philosophers, generals, and heads of state. Publications from the New York Times to The Guardian to The Economist praised it as one of the most important books of our era. But here is the thing: Harari did not write it for experts. He wrote it because he noticed that university students studying different disciplines, biology, economics, history, anthropology, were all looking at pieces of the human story without anyone connecting those pieces together into a coherent whole. He wanted to write the book that connected everything, and he did. Harari spent years distilling the findings of biology, archaeology, anthropology, economics, philosophy, and cognitive science into a single narrative. The result is a book that feels like someone finally zoomed out far enough to see the entire map of human existence and then drew you a picture of what it looks like. Let us start at the very beginning. About 300,000 years ago, there were actually several different species of humans walking the earth, not just one. There were the Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, stocky and powerful, built for cold climates. There was Homo erectus in East Asia, a species that had been walking the earth for nearly 2 million years. There was a tiny species called Homo floresiensis on the island of Flores in Indonesia, barely a meter tall, yet somehow making tools and surviving. There was Homo heidelbergensis. There were the recently discovered Denisovans. And there was us Homo sapiens, just one of many in East Africa. Most of us grow up thinking we are the only humans there have ever been, but we were just one contestant in a much larger competition. And for most of our early existence, we were not exactly dominant. Early Homo sapiens were prey animals as much as predators. We ate leftover bones that lions and hyenas abandoned. We did not chase down prey, we chased off vultures and cracked open the bones of dead animals for their marrow. So, what changed? How did this frightened, medium-sized primate become the being that would alter the entire face of the planet? The answer, Harari argues, happened around 70,000 years ago, and it was not a physical change, it was a mental one. Harari calls it the cognitive revolution. Something shifted in the wiring of the human brain. We do not know exactly what caused it, possibly a random genetic mutation that altered the structure of our neural connections. But the result was that Homo sapiens suddenly developed a completely new way of thinking and communicating. We could use language in a way no other animal could. Now, other animals communicate. Bees perform elaborate dances to show where flowers are. Vervet monkeys have specific alarm calls for eagles, snakes, and lions, and other monkeys respond differently to each one. These are sophisticated systems. But Homo sapiens could do something no other creature had done before. We could talk about things that do not exist. We could talk about spirits and gods that no one had ever seen, about justice and honor as abstract principles, about nations and corporations as collective identities, about tomorrow and 10 years from now and 100 generations into the future, about love as a concept that transcends any individual relationship. Things you cannot see or touch or measure, pure ideas, pure stories. And this, Harari says, was the superpower that changed everything. Think about it this way. How do you get 1,000 chimpanzees to cooperate on a difficult project? You cannot. They form small alliances based on personal relationships, compete for dominance, and fracture before they achieve anything significant. The largest stable social group for most primates is around 50 individuals, held together by personal knowledge of each other. But how do you get 100,000 human beings to cooperate toward a shared goal, to build a cathedral, fight a war, run an economy? You give them a shared story to believe in, a religion that tells them they are all children of the same creator, a nation that tells them they share a homeland and a destiny, a company that gives them a common mission, a legal code that promises everyone will be treated by the same rules. This is what Harari calls the power of fiction. Not fiction as in lies or harmless fairy tales, but fiction as in shared beliefs that exist only in human minds and yet have enormous real-world consequences. Your country is a fiction. There is no such thing as France or India or the United States. In the physical world, there are just rivers and mountains and fields and weather. But billions of people believe in these countries so deeply that they pay taxes to them, die in wars for them, and feel profound emotion when their national anthem plays. Money is a fiction. That piece of paper in your wallet has no real value on its own. It is simply a promise written in ink. A lion will not accept it in exchange for your life. A drought will not be impressed by it. But because billions of people simultaneously believe in it, it functions with extraordinary power and efficiency. It is the most universal and most successful shared story in human history. This ability to create shared imagined realities and convince millions of strangers to believe in them and act accordingly is what allowed Homo sapiens to cooperate in groups of thousands and eventually millions. And that cooperation is what made us unstoppable. The Neanderthals were probably stronger than us, their bones denser and their muscles more powerful. Their brains were at least as large as ours. They had fire, they fashioned tools, they buried their dead. They survived in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years through ice ages and catastrophes. But they could not create shared myths that united large numbers of strangers. Their cooperation was limited to small bands of people who knew each other personally. Within a few thousand years of Homo sapiens arriving in Europe, the Neanderthals were gone. Harari does not claim we definitely hunted them to extinction. The evidence is not conclusive. Perhaps we outcompeted them for food. Perhaps we brought diseases. Perhaps there were occasional violent encounters. Most likely, it was some combination. But the pattern is unmistakable. Wherever Homo sapiens went, other species of humans disappeared. We are, in that sense, a species that has always transformed and ended the worlds around us. This takes us to the next great turning point, the agricultural revolution. For most of human history, our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They walked from place to place, following herds, picking berries and roots, fishing in rivers. It sounds exhausting, but Harari makes a fascinating argument. Hunter-gatherers actually had pretty good lives. They were not starving all the time. A hunter-gatherer probably worked about 30 to 40 hours a week to feed themselves, compared to a medieval peasant who worked dawn to dusk every day. They had varied diets, they were physically fit, and they did not have to worry about crop failures because they were not depending on a single crop. They knew their environment deeply, every tree, every animal track, every edible plant in their territory. Then, about 12,000 years ago, something shifted. In a few places around the world, the Middle East, China, Central America, humans began farming. They stopped following the animals and started planting the wheat. And according to Harari, this was the worst mistake in human history. That is a bold claim. Let him explain it. When humans started farming, yes, they could produce more food. More food meant more babies could survive. The population grew. But here is the cruel trick. More people meant you needed even more food, which meant more farming, which kept the population growing, which required even more farming. You were now trapped. Farming required you to stay in one place. You had to build houses, dig irrigation channels, store grain. You had to defend your stores from raiders. You had to maintain the land every season. Life became harder, not easier. Archaeological evidence shows that early farmers were shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They had more bone damage from repetitive labor. They had worse teeth from eating mostly grain. They were more vulnerable to disease because they lived in dense settlements near their own waste and their animals. And then the real kicker. All that stored grain attracted not just mice and insects, but also other humans who wanted to take it. Farming created wealth, and wealth created hierarchy. Suddenly there were people who owned land and people who did not. People who commanded armies and people who were conscripted into them. Harari makes the striking observation that the real winners of the agricultural revolution were not the humans, it was the plants, wheat in particular. Before farming, wheat was an obscure wild grass growing in a small corner of the Middle East. Today, wheat covers about 2.5 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface. It is one of the most successful plants in the history of life on this planet, not because it is nice to eat, but because it exploited us. By making itself useful as food, wheat convinced millions of humans to dedicate their entire lives to its care, planting it, watering it, protecting it from insects, carrying it from field to storehouse. From a gene-spreading perspective, wheat won. We just think we tamed it. This is Harari's way of flipping the usual story. We say we domesticated animals and plants, but in a real sense, they domesticated us. So, we shaped our entire lives around serving them. Now, all those millions of people crammed into early cities needed systems to manage themselves. And that brings us to the third revolution. Harari discusses the invention of writing and number systems, and the rise of complex societies. As human communities grew larger, you could no longer rely on personal memory and direct relationships to manage everything. If your kingdom had 1,000,000 people paying taxes and thousands of soldiers needing supplies, you needed a way to record information beyond what any human brain could hold. Around 5,000 years ago, the Sumerians, in what is today Iraq, invented writing, not to write poetry or tell stories. The earliest writing was accounting records, lists of grain, counts of cattle, tax records. And with writing came a new kind of reality: recorded law, organized religion, documented history. Shared fictions became even more powerful when they were written down. Along with writing came the invention of money, and this deserves its own moment. Money is genuinely one of the most brilliant inventions in human history. Before money, if you had apples and needed shoes, you had to find a shoemaker who happened to want apples. This is called barter, and it is incredibly inconvenient. Money solved this problem by creating a universal medium that everyone agrees has value, not because it is inherently valuable, but because everyone believes everyone else will accept it. It is a promise, a mutual fiction, and it is the most universal fiction in the world, more universal than any religion or nationality. You can travel to a country whose language you do not speak, whose religion you do not share, whose food you do not recognize, and yet the moment you pull out the local currency, people will trade with you. Money is the one story that almost all humans have agreed to believe simultaneously. Harari makes a beautiful point here. Money works because it is based on trust, not trust in the piece of paper, but trust in the entire system of people who use it. When that trust collapses, the money collapses with it. History is full of currencies that became worthless almost overnight because people stopped believing in them. Now let us talk about empires, because this is where the story takes a darker turn. Harari takes a very unsentimental look at the history of conquest and empire. He does not romanticize it, but he also does not let us off the hook with easy outrage. He asks us to really grapple with the complexity. For most of human history, the default social arrangement was small tribes or city-states, each with their own gods, laws, and customs. Then certain civilizations began building empires, absorbing all those separate little worlds into one giant shared framework. The Roman Empire, the Mongol Empire, the British Empire. These were built on violence, exploitation, and cultural destruction. That is the honest truth, and Harari does not pretend otherwise. But here is his uncomfortable observation. Empires also spread things. They spread roads and trade routes. They spread legal systems that protected at least some rights. They spread languages that allowed distant peoples to communicate. They spread technologies and crops and ideas. He is not saying imperialism was good. He is saying history is genuinely complicated, and if you want to understand how we got here, you cannot just dismiss the entire imperial chapter as evil and move on. You have to sit with the messiness. And he points out something that will make almost every person on earth slightly uncomfortable. Virtually every nation, every culture, every people alive today is the product of conquest and mixture. There is almost no such thing as a pure, untouched culture that existed peacefully from the beginning. The very nations that today speak most loudly about independence and sovereignty often exist because of layers and layers of conquest and colonization in their past. Now let us move to something that Harari calls perhaps the most important revolution in human history, the scientific revolution. For most of human existence, people believed the world was essentially known. All important knowledge had already been revealed by gods or ancestors or ancient texts. The job of smart people was to memorize and interpret this existing wisdom, not to discover new things. Then, starting around the year 1500, in Europe, something changed. A handful of people started asking a question that seems obvious to us now, but was actually radical at the time. What if we do not know? What if our current understanding is wrong? This willingness to admit ignorance, to say, "I do not know, let us find out," was the seed of modern science. Scientists like Copernicus said, "Wait, let me actually measure the movements of planets and see if they agree with what the ancient texts say." Spoiler, they did not. The Earth was not at the center of the universe, and that was just the beginning. The scientific revolution unleashed a cascade of discoveries that transformed every single aspect of human life. And crucially, it also changed humanity's relationship with power. Harari makes a fascinating argument here. For the first time in history, wealth and power became linked to scientific knowledge and technological progress. European rulers realized that funding scientific expeditions and research could give them military and economic advantages over rivals. Columbus sailed to America not in search of adventure, but because the Spanish crown wanted trade routes and resources. The British East India Company was not just a trading company, it was a corporation with its own army, backed by the intellectual infrastructure of British science and finance. This marriage of capitalism, science, and empire created a feedback loop. More money funded more science, which created better weapons and ships, which enabled more conquest, which created more money. And within a few centuries, European powers had colonized most of the world. Now, we need to talk about capitalism, because Harari treats it almost like a religion, and when you hear his argument, you will understand why. Before capitalism, most people throughout history believed that money was fundamentally limited. There was only so much wealth in the world, and getting rich meant taking it from someone else. The economic pie was fixed. Capitalism introduced a radically new idea: growth. The pie can expand. You can create new wealth through investment and innovation. And if you believe in the future, you can borrow money today against the wealth you will create tomorrow. This is credit. Credit is what makes capitalism work. A baker borrows money to build a bigger oven. The bigger oven lets him bake more bread. He sells the bread, repays the loan, and has money left over. Wealth has been created from almost nothing, from a belief in a possible future. Harari says capitalism is essentially a religion because it is based on a story we all agree to believe, the story of growth, of progress, of a future that will be better and more prosperous than today. As long as we all believe it, it works. He also takes a hard look at the relationship between capitalism and empire. The slave trade, for example, was not just cruelty, it was a business model. Investors funded slave voyages, expecting returns. The financial system of the time was deeply entangled with human trafficking. This is not comfortable history, but it is honest history. And capitalism has continued to reshape the world in ways that are both miraculous and troubling. Today, more people live in prosperity than at any point in human history. Diseases that killed millions have been eradicated. Child mortality has plummeted. Life expectancy has more than doubled in the last 200 years. But capitalism has also contributed to the destruction of the natural world, the extinction of countless species, and new forms of inequality and exploitation. Harari does not let us have a simple feel-good story here. Now let us slow down and explore something Harari discusses with remarkable depth: the history of human happiness. Here is the big question. With all this progress, are we actually happier? You might assume the answer is an obvious yes. We live longer, than at any point in human history. We are healthier. We are safer from predators, from famine, from most of the diseases that used to kill children before their 5th birthday. We have access to food, medicine, entertainment, communication, and physical comfort that even the wealthiest kings of 500 years ago could not have imagined. A medieval king could not watch a movie on a Sunday evening. He could not take an antibiotic when he got a bad infection. He could not call his friend in another country on a whim. Surely, with all of this, we must be vastly happier. But Harari is not so sure. And the reasons he gives are worth sitting with. First, he points to something psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. We humans are astonishing at adapting to new conditions. When your situation improves, your expectations rise to match it. The things that once excited or satisfied you quickly become your new normal, your new baseline. Buying a new car feels wonderful for about 3 weeks. Then it is just your car. Getting a raise feels amazing for a month or two. Then it is just your salary, and you start thinking about the next raise. This is not a moral failing, it is how our brains are wired. But it means that material improvements do not automatically translate into lasting increases in happiness. Second, Harari notes that the factors most consistently linked to genuine happiness are not the ones that economic growth primarily delivers. Strong, meaningful relationships with other people. A sense of purpose and significance, feeling that your life matters and that your actions have meaning. The experience of being competent and respected within your community. Time in nature. Physical movement. These are the things that reliably make people feel good. And many of them were more available to a village farmer of 200 years ago than to a modern office worker in a high-rise apartment building in a city where they barely know their neighbors. The Industrial Revolution, whatever it gave us materially, also atomized communities, uprooted people from their ancestral places, replaced meaningful craft work with repetitive factory labor, and put millions of people into environments of noise, pollution, and anonymous isolation. The progress was real, but so was the loss. Third, Harari raises a question that is genuinely uncomfortable and that most books about human progress completely ignore. He asks about the trillions of animals that our civilization has brought into existence and subjected to suffering. Factory farming is one of the most morally significant things happening in the world today, and most of us have carefully arranged our lives to not think about it. Pigs are highly intelligent animals, more intelligent than dogs, by most measures. Chickens are complex, social creatures. Yet billions of them are raised in conditions of extreme confinement, unable to engage in any of their natural behaviors, living short lives of pain and stress before slaughter. Harari is not telling you what to eat. He is asking you to be honest about what you know. If the amount of suffering in the universe matters, and most ethical traditions agree that it does, then the scale of animal suffering built into our modern food system is one of the most serious moral problems of our time. He leaves you to wrestle with that. He does not resolve it neatly. That discomfort, that wrestling, is part of what makes this book different from most feel-good stories about human achievement. Let us also talk about one of the most fascinating sections of the book, the unification of humankind. For most of human history, the earth was essentially a collection of separate worlds. The people of China had no idea what was happening in Mexico. The inhabitants of Australia were completely unknown to the people of Europe. A farmer in medieval France and a warrior in medieval Japan were living in entirely different civilizations, shaped by different histories, different gods, different languages, different assumptions about reality. History was happening in parallel, in isolation, across the globe. But over the last 500 years, those separate worlds have been colliding, merging, and fusing into what is increasingly a single global civilization. This process has been violent, unequal, and full of injustice, but it has also been undeniably real. Harari identifies 3 forces that have driven this unification. The first is money, which, as we discussed, creates connections between people who share nothing else. A trader in 16th century Portugal and a spice merchant in India might have had nothing in common. Different religions, different languages, different values, but they could still do business because both understood the value of gold and silver. The second is empire, which by conquest and administration, however violently, has linked distant peoples into shared frameworks of law, infrastructure, and governance. The British Empire, for all its cruelties, connected places that had never been in contact, built railways and telegraph lines, and spread a common legal and bureaucratic language across vast distances. The third is religion, particularly the universalist religions like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam, which declare that their message is for all of humanity, not just one tribe or one people. When a Christian missionary goes to Africa or Asia, they are not just spreading one local deity's teachings, they are claiming that this truth is universal, that it transcends all human boundaries. This impulse, whatever you think of its specific content, has been a powerful force for connecting different peoples under a single conceptual umbrella. Today, the result of these converging forces is something genuinely unprecedented in human history. We are, for the first time ever, actually one civilization, at least in some meaningful sense. Most countries use some version of the same economic system. International laws and norms govern how states interact. Scientific knowledge is shared across borders almost instantly. People everywhere wear similar clothes, use similar devices, drink the same coffee brands, and worry about the same global threats: pandemics, climate change, nuclear proliferation. We still have our differences. The diversity of languages, foods, music, and local traditions remains rich and real. But the shared layer of global culture and economic integration is unprecedented. A medieval Chinese farmer and a medieval English farmer would have had almost nothing in common. A Chinese office worker and an English office worker today share vastly more, not just in material culture, but in assumptions about how the world works and what a good life looks like. How we manage that shared civilization, whether we do it wisely or foolishly, justly or unjustly, is the central challenge of our time. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most unsettling part of Sapiens, the discussion of where we are going. Harari ends the book by looking at the near future, and it is not comfortable reading. He points to three forces that are likely to transform what it means to be human in the coming decades. The first is biotechnology, our growing ability to engineer life itself. We can already edit genes. In a few decades, we may be able to design babies with selected traits, cure genetic diseases before birth, or even enhance human intelligence and physical ability beyond natural limits. The second is artificial intelligence machines that can learn and perform cognitive tasks that used to require human minds. Already, AI systems outperform humans in narrow tasks like playing chess or diagnosing certain diseases from medical images. Where does this end? The third is the merging of the biological and the technological brains that are connected directly to computers, implants that enhance memory or mood, or even uploading human consciousness into a digital form. Harari does not claim to know where any of this will go. But he asks the question that makes the entire book click into place. If Homo sapiens rewrites its own genetic code, designs its own brain, and merges with machines, is it still Homo sapiens? Are we witnessing the end of our species not through extinction, but through self-transformation into something else entirely? This is not science fiction. These conversations are happening right now in labs around the world. The question of what comes after Homo sapiens is not a question for the distant future. It is a question for this century. And Harari's most piercing observation is this: we have become so powerful as a species that we are essentially gods. We can create species, destroy species, control the climate, redirect rivers, and reshape the planet. But we have the wisdom of a child. Our power has grown faster than our self-knowledge. We do not really know what we want. We do not understand our own minds and desires. and we are making decisions that will affect millions of generations of future beings, human and otherwise, without any real consensus or wisdom guiding us. That is the challenge he leaves us with. Not how do we get more powerful, but how do we become wise enough to handle the power we already have. Now let us spend a moment with some of the most powerful and memorable quotes from this book, because Harari has a gift for crystallizing huge ideas into a single sentence. He writes that history is something that very few people have been doing while everyone else was plowing fields and carrying water. This is a striking reminder that the grand sweep of history, the revolutions, the empires, the philosophical breakthroughs, was the work of a tiny minority. Most humans, throughout most of history, were too busy with the daily grind of survival to shape the larger story. It makes you think, what would be possible if more of humanity had the time and resources to think and create? He also writes that we did not domesticate wheat. Wheat domesticated us. This line captures his entire philosophy in a single sentence. The things we think we control often end up controlling us. Our technologies, our institutions, our economies, we created them, but they also create us. They shape our desires, our daily rhythms, our sense of what is normal and possible. Then there is this culture tends to argue that it forbids only that which is unnatural. But from a biological perspective, nothing is unnatural. Whatever is possible is by definition also natural. This is Harari at his most philosophically sharp. When people say something is against nature, what they really mean is that it is against their cultural norms. Nature itself has no preferences. Everything that exists in the world is, by definition, natural. He writes that money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. Read that again. A system of mutual trust, not of value, of trust. The moment you see money as a trust mechanism rather than a thing with inherent value, your entire understanding of economics shifts. And perhaps most profoundly, he writes that we are more powerful than ever before, and yet we have very little idea what to do with all that power. We are consequently wreaking havoc on our fellow animals and on the surrounding ecosystem, seeking little more than our own comfort and amusement, yet never finding satisfaction. Is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who do not know what they want? That last sentence might be the most important sentence in the entire book. Dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who do not know what they want. That is us. That is the challenge of our moment. All right, here is what you can do starting today. Because the best books do not just change how you think, they change how you act. First, question the stories around you. Every institution in your life, your country, your religion, your bank, your company exists because a group of people agreed to believe in it. That does not make it wrong or worthless, but it means it can be changed. When something seems fixed and permanent and natural, ask yourself, is this actually real? Or is it just a story we all agreed to tell? That question is the beginning of wisdom. Second, think long. Harari zooms out to hundreds of thousands of years, and what he shows is that what seems obvious and inevitable in the present was anything but inevitable 50 years ago. The same will be true 50 years from now. Train yourself to think in longer time horizons. Ask how the choices being made today about technology, about the environment, about inequality will look to people living 100 years from now. Third, reconnect with what actually makes you happy, not what you have been told should make you happy, but what actually does. The research Harari cites suggests that connection, meaning, and engagement matter far more than material accumulation. This is not news, but we keep forgetting it. Make one decision this week that prioritizes depth of experience over consumption of stuff. Fourth, take the suffering of other beings seriously. Harari's chapter on factory farming is genuinely disturbing. Even if you are not going to become vegetarian tomorrow, sit with the discomfort he creates. The scale of animal suffering in our modern food system is something most of us have been very carefully not thinking about. Even one informed decision, one meal, one product choice made with awareness is better than none. Fifth, embrace uncertainty. One of the most valuable things about Sapiens is that it models a way of thinking that is comfortable with not knowing. Harari does not pretend to have all the answers about where humanity is heading. He asks hard questions and presents multiple possibilities. In a world that keeps demanding certainty and simple answers, the ability to sit comfortably with complexity and ambiguity is one of the most important skills you can develop. If you do nothing else after listening to this today, carry one question with you. Ask yourself regularly, what story am I living inside? What shared fiction shapes my choices, my values, my sense of what is possible? And is that story one I actually believe in, or just one I have inherited without examining it? That kind of conscious relationship with the stories of your culture is exactly what Harari is inviting you into. So what do we make of Sapiens as a whole? I give this book a 9.5 out of 10, and here is the reason it does something extraordinarily rare. It takes the entire sweep of human history, from the first campfire to the genetic engineering lab, and makes it feel like one coherent, urgent, personal story. You finish this book not just knowing more, you see differently. Who should read this book? Honestly, everyone. If you are a young person trying to understand the world you have inherited, read this. If you are a professional wondering whether the systems you work within are serving humanity, read this. If you are a parent thinking about what kind of world your children will navigate, read this. If you are simply someone who has ever looked at the news and felt confused and overwhelmed by the complexity of human civilization, read this. It will not give you all the answers, but it will give you better questions. And better questions are more valuable than pre-packaged answers. If this summary added something to your day, please take a second and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Leave a comment below, telling me the single idea from Sapiens that hit you hardest. Was it the cognitive revolution, the dark side of the agricultural revolution, the question of whether we are happy? I would genuinely love to know. And if you want to keep expanding your mind with ideas that matter, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new summary. Now, before you go next time on this channel, we are going into a book that will completely transform how you understand human motivation, decision-making, and the hidden forces that shape every choice you make. It is one of the most influential books of the 21st century, and its central insight is so simple and so counterintuitive that once you hear it, you will immediately start seeing it everywhere. That one is coming soon. You will not want to miss it. Thank you for spending this time exploring ideas with me. Stay curious, stay humble, and never stop asking why.